There's a very famous quote that said, "We stand on the shoulders of giants." And I don't think there's anyone in the martial arts community that you could say would be larger, grander, greater than Donn Draeger. I didn't meet Draeger. 99% of the people here never met Draeger. But they've read his books, they've met his students. And in some degree, I think they felt the spirit in which he tried to practice the martial arts. So the whole point of today was to say, it's about time we got together. It's about time we looked at Draeger's legacy again. And it's about time, while we have the time, to bring people who really knew him and to bring out the real Draeger as a person, not just as an idol or an image or some kind of hero that we want to believe is perfect. So bringing out a real man, I hope, will actually bring out more of how impressive his legacy really is. So I think it's very important to understand that all of this started because the Japanese Academy of Budo realized that perhaps they've been discussing the evolution from Bujutsu and Budo in a very simple way that was perhaps a little naive. And we're very grateful to a gentleman called Nagao Susumu Sensei. And Nagao Sensei had read Draeger's books, and he said, wow, his descriptions and classifications of Gendai Budo versus classical Bujutsu versus classical Budo is very, very interesting. And he asked a group of Japanese people living in Japan, well, could you come and talk about Draeger's legacy? And we said, well, no, I mean, if you want to really understand it, then you should bring in the people who studied with him and trained with him, were his students and were his friends. And so very kindly, he arranged through the Japanese government to have people fly in from the US and from Australia to give a presentation to the Japanese Budo Academy. That was done in Japanese on the 23rd. But there was very little time, and I know that the organizers of that event themselves, they felt there wasn't enough time to really have the discussions that they wanted to have. From our point of view, we really wanted to create more time for each of the lecturers to really expand on what they gave to the Japanese people, but also pointedly make a comment to non-Japanese practitioners of martial arts and say, look, go back to the 60s, go back to the 70s, there was a guy who was really pushing an understanding, a really deep understanding, both physically and also philosophically, of what these things can do and what they can bring to an individual. And I think our event today is really about opening up that to a wider audience, thanks to platforms like YouTube, but also reconnecting people from across different continents who perhaps have not been connected before or have been reluctant in some ways to discuss some of this. So if it acts as a catalyst for a better relationships between traditions, and also as a bridge. For me, one of the great things about Draeger, if you love judo, Draeger did judo. If you love weight training, physical training, Draeger did that. If you love Kuri, Draeger did that. And he's one of the very few people who can knit that all together. So I think it's acted as a fantastic catalyst, and as one of the organizers, for me, it's been fascinating to see the reactions and the amount of generosity that's been given by people who have offered suggestions, who have offered their time, who have offered resources, so that, again, we can bring people together, we can have a discussion. And to be honest with you, is try and perhaps plot a path to how we can refocus ourselves, perhaps, on not just taking everything for granted, not taking everything as given from both our Japanese seniors and teachers, but also from our Western seniors and teachers as well. So if this is a starting point for all of that, then we've done a good job.
Hunter Chip Armstrong began training in martial arts with various karate systems in the early 60s. Meeting Don Draeger in 1975, Armstrong began his foray into Japan's Koryu Bujutsu. As first a member and then director of the International Hoplology Society, Chip has engaged in the research and development of Hoplology. Since 1996, Chip has been involved in developing training programs and presenting seminars for the military and law enforcement, integrating inherent principles of human combative behavior with modern combat techniques and technologies in both contexts.
Combat mindset. As I said, behavior and biomechanics closely connected. Combat mindset is based on over 400,000 years of spear use. Posture and body action affect behavior. Behavior as well can affect posture and body action. Back to the connection with Kobudo Budos. We've come a long way. Close personal combat systems for the battlefield have developed in many cultures around the world. All cultures. Any culture of any size that was large enough to build up military groups for battlefield combat had systems for battlefield combat. Unusually in Japan, and due to a unique combination of geographical and cultural circumstances, Japan's traditional battlefield systems were brought to an unusually high level of behavioral and physical capabilities. It's not because the Japanese are smarter, stronger, faster, or different human beings than the rest of us. Purely through historical circumstance, they had a period of time where the martial culture, this is in Japan, military man, the military class is at the highest level of the society hierarchy of any culture you've seen. The warrior was at the top end.
Liam Keely was born in South Africa and began his martial arts training at the age of 10 with judo. He moved to Japan in 1974 to further his practice of Goju-ryu karate. Liam traveled to Malaysia and Indonesia in 1979 with Don Draeger and a team of other hoplologists, learning directly from Draeger his approach to the study and classification of martial arts, weaponry, and culture. He returned to South Africa in 1980 to study anthropology, while at the same time, remarkably, learning Zulu stick fighting. Returning to Japan in 1984, he began his study of Tatsumi Ryu and later began training in Todahabuko Ryu. Liam has continued to promote collaboration and education in the martial arts as a member of JMAS through organizing the first International Hoplology Conference in 1996, and more recently as a co-founder of the Koryu Collective.
So hoplology comes from the Greek root hopl, meaning armed or armored. So the Greek warrior, the classical warrior who fought with, for example, at Thermopylae, with spear and shield. The shield is the hoplon, the person is the hoplite, and the study of armed conflict is hoplology. The doyen of hoplology is generally considered to be Sir Richard Francis Burton. Some of you may be familiar with his name. So he was a Victorian, multi-talented man with severe personality drawbacks. Enough to get me, well, this is an interesting picture. It's by, I think, Leighton. You can see the scar across his jaw, which he got from a Somali spear thrust. So some things don't change. So after Burton passed away, there was a bit of a gap between. There's a bit of a gap between Burton and Draeger. However, there were Westerners involved in martial arts in the Meiji era.
Dr. Alexander Bennett. He spent a year in Japan as part of a high school exchange program where he first experienced kendo, leading to a lifetime's dedication to this art. He is Doctor of Human and Environmental Studies from Kyoto University and a Doctor of Japanese Philosophy from the University of Canterbury, and is currently a professor in the Division of International Affairs at Kansai University. Alex is Vice President of the International Naginata Federation, a member of the International Committee of the All Japan Kendo Federation, International Committee of the All Japan Jukendo Federation, and a director of the Japanese Academy of Budo. He founded and serves as editor-in-chief of Kendo World and holds the grades of Kendo Kyoshi 7th Dan, Iaido 5th Dan, Naginata 5th Dan, Tankendo 5th Dan, Jukendo 5th Dan, and Jigishin Kage-ryu Kenjutsu 3rd Dan. He also studies Tendo-ryu Naginata.
When you think about Bujutsu being martial technique, therefore more combat-oriented, and Budo being the modern reincarnation, if you like, or reinvention into a way for educational purposes. Well, that's broadly speaking sort of true in Japan, but there was a time in Japanese history, the 1930s in particular, where Budo actually became very combat oriented, or at least it was utilized for that purpose. So there's a lot of confusion even in Japan with how these words are used. There is no real consensus. So it's always been changing, as I've mentioned. So lumping everything into old and new, as it is in Japan at the moment, is very problematic. And it also ignores what Draeger was pointing out, that both are or can be civil and both can be martial, actually, as well. Another problem is this in Japan, and fairly standard international understanding is Budo is actually, in terms of its moral significance, superior to Jutsu. Okay, so Do is more important or more humane, perhaps, than Jutsu.
Phil Realmk was born in New York State in 1938. He joined the Air Force in 1955, and a year later found himself at the beginning of an unplanned 3-year tour in Japan, and a lifelong journey into the world of martial arts, beginning with Judo in 1957. This journey included a 40-year on and off residence in Japan, returning to Japan as a civilian in 1961. Through an introduction from Don Draeger, he began the study of Shinto Muso-ryu Jojutsu. In 1978, Phil began the study of Tenshin Shoden Katori Shinto-ryu. In addition to the technical aspects of the martial arts, Phil was a co-founder and former president of the International Jodo Federation and founder and president of the Japan Martial Arts Society. After returning to the United States and retirement in 1998, Phil built a dojo attached to his home near Seattle, Washington, the Shintokan, where he instructs in both Koryu traditions.
Back in the 60s, when Kodokan tested young students, kata skills, who are ready for promotion, when you're ready for promotion, any kind of Don promotion, you learn kata. So once a month on Thursdays, I believe it was, they'd have these 2 or 3 hour seminars to see if the judo students' kata was up to par, so they get promoted. And usually they weren't up to par. They would ask Don Draeger and one of his students, a good friend of mine, Howard Alexander from Canada, to do kata for the Japanese. Kodokan would never ask a Japanese teacher to do it. They asked Donn Draeger to do it. He was a perfectionist. It was good. He was good. Both he and Howard worked together very well. It shows you the level of trust that teachers had about Don. Okay, in addition to the many modern martial arts and whatever else he studied, Don's most serious studies turned out to be in Koryu, the traditional martial arts. Specifically, the 400-year-old school of Shinto Muso-ryu Jojutsu and the 600-year-old school of Katori Shinto-ryu.